Okay, so the last thing that we learned last time was that if a person wants to lend someone money, what it means that he's going to have to withdraw money from the bank and either will take a penalty or will have to pay, will lose out. Yafsidis haribis shahabank nosem. He's going to lose out on the interest that the bank is giving him on his money. He's not allowed to asur lenakot sikum haribit mecheshbon maser haksafim machmas isaribis. So, in other words, it goes without saying that you can't pass on that charge to the person that you're lending money to. You can't say, well, since the bank is, I'm losing the interest, you got to pay me back that interest. That for sure you can't do. But you're not even allowed to deduct the interest amount from your meiser ksafim, from what you would normally tithe. Whereas if you have a certain amount of money that you give to tzedakah, you can't say, well, I'm losing, let's say, $1,000 in interest, so I'm going to deduct that from my meiser money, because that doesn't count as tzedakah, at least not for the meiser purposes. But then we said, but you are allowed to give a loan to a poor person using a heter iska. And you can, once you set up a heter iska, you can charge that interest rate, right, based on what you would normally get or whatever terms you'd like. And then here's what you could do. If, let's say, the guy owes you $1,000 using the heter iska as a return on your investment, not as an interest payment, because that's what you say. It's not as the return on the loan. It's a return on the investment, so to speak. So he ends up paying you $1,000 as a return. What you can say to him is, you know what? Keep the $1,000, and you can deduct that from your meiser. There's that much you are allowed to do. And where is he quoting this from? This is being quoted from Sefer Aleinu L'Shabeach. Not exactly, it's a contemporary sefer. Okay, let's go on to the next simon. Hilchos Nidrei Tzedakah, the laws of pledges. Okay.
Hey, Rabbi.
Hello.
Hi, I've been away for a while. What sefer are we doing?
We're doing a sefer called Hilchos Tzedakah, and we're up to Siman Yud Ches. Can you see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this is the laws of making pledges. Lechatchila misha matchil latet maaser ksafim tov sheyatneh shehu nohi kein b'li neder. As we learned before, the din of maaser ksafim is a mitzvah, but it's not an obligatory mitzvah. A person can exempt himself without tithing his assets annually. So a person should always say b'li neder when he begins this process of maaser ksafim. Mikol makom mishanoha gimel pa'amim v'yoter latet maaser v'lo hitna me'ikara shehu nohi kein b'li neder. He says, but if a person has done this 3 times or 3 years in a row, and he didn't say initially that he's doing it b'li neder, amoda'a shemosim be'erev Rosh Hashanah mo'ila b'di'evet shelo yochel alav shum neder mizeh shanoha gimel pa'amim v'yoter laseis maaser. He says the fact that you give a moda'ah, you make a declaration in front of a tribunal at Hataras Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah, that will help to annul that sense of obligation that you may have inadvertently accrued as a result of having done this mitzvah 3 times. Because part and parcel of that statement that you make when you do Hataras Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah is that you say that anything that I did 3 times without saying b'li neder, I want that to be annulled. So that's really what this covers. In other words, this would fall under that category of one of those things that you do habitually or regularly. And if you didn't say beli neder, you can get a hataras nadarim for it. Correct. Right. Right. A person should never say, I'm taking a neder to do something. In general, you should not take nadarim. Yeah. Now, yesh poskim shahadvarim delael amurim b'mishalo kibal alatzmo b'machshavto laseis meiser. He says some say that that does not apply to someone who mentally had decided that he was going to tithe 10% of his income. In other words, he just basically said, "Look, last year I ended up giving such and such a percentage. I don't want that necessarily to be binding on me for future years." But if a person made a mental commitment to regularly tithe from now on, so some consider that a neder. And that therefore would not be enough just to give a generic notification, but you would have to actually specify to the dayanim that you would like that to be annulled. Some disagree, and they say that any kind of mental commitment that you make can be annulled through just that generic declaration that you make before the tribunal. However, and this is sort of like a generic rule, never commit yourself 100% that I'm going to do this mitzvah from now on. Okay, from now on, I'm going to keep Chalav Yisrael. Or from now on, I'm going to, what's an example of a mitzvah you're going to take on yourself?
Tefillin or something, whatever.
I'm going to wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, or I'm going to visit the sick every Thursday, right? In other words, even mentally, you shouldn't take it up upon yourself unless you say the words beli neder. I don't want this to be counted as a neder. Okay, now let's talk about pledges that you make for the poor. If a person took a vow, or he made a pledge, not even a vow, but he just said, okay, I pledge $100 to this particular, charity. Lo mo'ila le'inyan zeh, Mesiras Hamodah Shenagu Lasos Be'erev Rosh Hashanah Mekevin Shahotzi Neder B'Piv. He says you can't use Hataras Nedarim to annul that. Sorry, nice try, right? And there was a guy made a pledge in shul for Pesach time, and now he doesn't want to pay his pledge. So he says, "Oh, I'll do a Hataras Nedarim Erev Rosh Hashanah and get a brand new start." Right? Doesn't work. Right? Because once you said something verbally, it doesn't work. You can't withdraw it. And therefore, if the charity, in other words, remember, I think Moish, you and I had spoken about what's the expiration date on a pledge. But once you make a pledge, it's payable immediately. There's no such thing as net 30 or net 60, unless you stipulate those terms at the time that you made the pledge, right? So as soon as a person makes a pledge, unless you could argue that the tzedakah does not need the money right away. But if the aniyim are present, in other words, if the poor people that you've pledged to, or not the poor people, but the institution that you've pledged to, needs to make payroll, needs to begin the project, needs to start, and they need seed money in order to be able to get it done, and they really could use the donation right away, it becomes immediately payable upon the making of the pledge. A person, and sometimes you have this situation where a person says he made the pledge, but I'm not happy about X, Y, and Z, so I'll pay it when I get around to it. Well, you're in violation of halacha if you do that. You can't say, just because I'm not happy that X, Y, and Z took place, I'm not going to pay my pledge right away. Once the charity says we need the money, you have to chayev laseis lahem miyad. You have an immediate obligation. So this is from, I believe, the Shulchan Aruch itself. Yeah, it's right there in the Shulchan Aruch. And I think because it's so important, I'd like to just take a look at it inside in the Shulchan Aruch, Reish Nun Zayin Sif Gimel, because this actually was a case that we had where a donor had made a pledge and he was broigus about something. So he decided that maybe I'll pay it in my own good time. Reish Nun Zayin Gimel. Reish Nun Zayin Gimel. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, "Tzedakah harehi bichlal hanidarim." That tzedakah is it's subsumed under the laws of nidarim. Leficha ha'omer harei alai sela litzdaka, o harei hasela zu tzedakah, chayiv litna la'aniyim miyad. He says, and therefore, once a person makes a commitment, and he says, I hereby pledge $1,000 to tzedakah, or this $1,000 is going to tzedakah, then he becomes obligated to pay immediately. There's no 30-day extension. And if he delays, he violates the law of, the Torah says, that when you make a pledge to God, you can't delay the payment of that pledge. Because you have the ability to give the money right away. And the poor are right here. In other words, the cause needs the money. And if the aniyim are not there, in other words, you had pledged to tzedakah, but you don't see anyone right here in front of you who needs tzedakah, but you made the pledge, so you should put aside the money. And when the aniyim present themselves, so then you give it to them. Now the Ramah adds, he says that's all with charity that you've pledged on your own, right, independently. He says, but let's say you make a pledge in shul, or you make an online pledge to give to the administrator, to the gabbai of that charity. Eino over aleha afal gav da'aniyim mitzuyim ele im kain teva'o hagabai. You only become due once you receive a request for payment. Okay, it's only that's when the tzedakah is due. So if the charity sends you an invoice or an email that says, thank you very much for your pledge, you can send your check to or send your payment to such and such and such, that's when the payment is due. Va'az over aleha miyad, ikai mi'aniyim v'hagabai hayim achalik lahem miyad. And therefore, once you receive that invoice or request for payment, then and you don't pay, you're in violation, provided that the aniyim are present, and if the gabbai had your money, he would be able to distribute it right away. In other words, meaning that if the invoice is representing a charity that does not yet need the money, so then you can get by with saying, I don't need to pay. But once the charity says, listen, we have this project, we're going to be building something, and we need the money right away to start paying contractors and the trades and so forth, the architect, whatever it is, and they send you an invoice to pay up, so then you have to pay right away. Now, if the gabbai tzedakah is not aware that you made a pledge, you have to notify the gabbai to let him know that, hey, listen, I pledged this to tzedakah, And like, let's say, for example, you get called up for an aliyah and the gabbai didn't give you a card, but you mentally committed yourself to give a gift for the aliyah, let the gabbai know. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you on Mirz Hashem on Wednesday. There's no shiur tomorrow, just because I'm going to be out of town.